A peaceful village prepares for Christmas, with no idea what the night will bring. An exhausted polar bear struggles against the current, guiding her weakened cub in search of shelter. While the residents try to understand the danger, the bear's despair grows as a storm approaches. But when tensions explode, their survival depends on an unexpected choice from the residents. The town of North Star glowed like never before on that Christmas Eve. The small wooden houses, typical of the Alaskan coast, shimmered with multicolored garlands that snaked across the snow-covered roofs. The cold air carried the aroma of freshly baked bread from Old Joe's bakery, mixing with the salty smell of the sea and the smoke from chimneys rising towards a starry sky. Sarah Cooper, the town's mayor, oversaw the final preparations for the Christmas celebration in the central square. At 45, she was a woman respected by all the inhabitants of North Star, known for both her firmness and compassion. Her brown hair, sprinkled with snowflakes, swayed gently as she gave instructions to the volunteers, placing the last decorations on the giant central fir tree. "The lights must be visible from the sea," she exclaimed enthusiastically, her green eyes shining with the same intensity as the Christmas decorations. "We want this year to be special, more than ever." Tom, a 12-year-old boy with an overflowing imagination and innate curiosity, observed everything from the porch of the municipal library. His large brown eyes absorbed every detail of the scene as he drew in his inseparable sketchbook. The little boy had lost his father in a storm at sea 2 years ago, and since then he found solace in art and his special connection with nature. "What are you drawing this time, little artist?" asked Mike, the town's retired veterinarian, as he approached, limping slightly. At 60, Mike was an inexhaustible source of stories about animals and nature, and had become a kind of mentor for Tom. "The sea, Mike," Tom replied, without looking up from his drawing. "There's something different today. The waves, they seem restless." Mike adjusted his glasses and looked towards the horizon. The sea indeed showed unusual behavior for this time of year. The current seemed stronger, and large blocks of ice floated closer to the shore than usual. At the other end of town, in the small fishing port, Jake Wolf observed the same sea with different eyes. Tall and burly, with a scar crossing his left cheek, Jake was known for his unorthodox methods of making a living. His contacts in the exotic animal black market had provided him with a comfortable life, albeit at the cost of his reputation. "The Arctic currents are changing," he muttered to his companions as he lit a cigarette. "We might find some interesting surprises this winter." Meanwhile, several miles off the coast, Aurora, a majestic polar bear, struggled against treacherous currents. Her white fur, normally waterproof and protective, was beginning to weigh her down as she swam tirelessly, guiding her cub, Snow, between increasingly scattered ice floes. The change in temperatures had altered traditional migration routes, and mother and daughter now found themselves in unknown waters. Snow, barely a few months old, faithfully followed her mother, although fatigue was beginning to take its toll on her small body. Her black eyes, full of innocence and curiosity, occasionally fixed on the distant lights that were beginning to be seen on the horizon. In town, preparations for the Christmas celebration continued. Mrs. Johnson, the teacher at North Star's only school, directed the children's choir in the final rehearsal of the carols. The crystalline voices of the children rose in the cold air, creating a magical atmosphere that seemed to envelop the entire town. Sarah paused for a moment to admire the result of so many weeks of preparation. The houses sparkled like jewels in the snow, and the large Christmas tree in the central square had become a beacon of light and color. Children ran back and forth, their laughter mingling with the sound of bells from the small church. "It's going to be an unforgettable Christmas," she commented to her assistant, not knowing how prophetic her words would turn out to be. As the afternoon progressed, the wind began to change. Clouds gathered on the horizon, and the sea became increasingly agitated. The most veteran fishermen exchanged worried glances as they secured their boats in the port. Tom, who had finished his drawing, now walked along the rocky beach collecting shells and pieces of driftwood. The wind played with his red scarf, a gift from his mother the previous Christmas. He stopped when he noticed something unusual in the sand, large, deep tracks that didn't correspond to any local animal he knew. Mike, who had followed the boy at a distance, approached limping when he saw that Tom had stopped still. "What have you found, little one?" he asked, but his question hung in the air when he too saw the tracks. "They're polar bear tracks," Mike whispered, with a mixture of amazement and concern in his voice. "But they're too far south, much too far south." At that moment, a deep, dull sound resonated from the nearby cliffs. Tom and Mike turned slowly, their hearts beating hard. There, majestic and terrifying, was Aurora. Her white fur shone with the last rays of the sun, and her dark eyes observed them with a mixture of caution and desperation. Behind her, partially hidden, was Snow, visibly shaking and showing signs of exhaustion. The little cub had wet fur and her breathing was labored. "Don't move, Tom," Mike whispered, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "They're as beautiful as they are dangerous." But Tom felt no fear. In Snow's eyes, he saw something that seemed familiar, the same loneliness and vulnerability he had felt after losing his father. Without thinking twice, he took a step forward. "Tom, no!" Mike exclaimed, but the boy had already made eye contact with the cub. At that precise moment, the first fireworks exploded in the sky, illuminating the scene with red and golden flashes. The sudden noise scared the bears, causing Aurora to roar and Snow, in her panic, to run in the opposite direction from her mother, heading into the forest that bordered the town. Chaos broke out in a matter of seconds. Aurora, torn between following her cub and keeping her distance from humans, began to move erratically along the beach. The fishermen who were nearby began to shout, attracting the attention of more town inhabitants. Sarah, who had heard the commotion, came running to the beach along with several villagers. The sight of the polar bear in their small coastal town was something none of them had ever experienced. "Nobody get close," Sarah shouted, trying to maintain order. "Mike, we need your expertise." But before they could organize any kind of response, Tom had already begun to run in the direction Snow had taken, disappearing among the snowy trees. "Tom, come back!" his mother Anna shouted, having just arrived at the scene. Night was falling rapidly over North Star, and with it, a snowstorm began to form on the horizon. The Christmas lights, which moments before had seemed so festive, now cast unsettling shadows on the snow. Jake observed everything from a distance, his eyes shining with unhealthy interest. He took out his phone and began to make calls in a low voice. "We have an interesting situation here," he muttered to his interlocutor. "Bring the equipment, and hurry." As the town descended into chaos and confusion, no one noticed that the first drops of blood were staining the snow where Snow had been standing. The little cub was injured, and time was working against her. The first chapter ends with the town divided between fear and compassion, a child lost in the forest, a desperate mother bear, and an approaching storm. The Christmas lights continued to shine, oblivious to the drama unfolding under their festive glow. Night had fallen completely over North Star, and snowflakes began to descend with greater intensity. The Christmas lights flickered against the dark sky, creating a surreal contrast with the emergency situation unfolding in the town. Sarah had quickly established an operations center in the town hall. The wooden building, normally quiet, now buzzed with activity. Maps of the region covered the tables, and the town radio crackled constantly with communications between search groups. "We need to find Tom before the storm gets worse," Sarah declared, pointing to areas of the forest on the map. "And we also need to deal with the bears. Mike, what do you suggest?" The retired veterinarian ran a hand through his gray hair while studying the map carefully. His years of experience with local wildlife had never prepared him for a situation like this. "Polar bears are extremely dangerous in these conditions," he explained. "Aurora is stressed and separated from her cub. Plus, from the marks I saw on the beach, Snow could be injured. We need tranquilizers, but my supplies are limited to smaller animals." Anna, Tom's mother, paced back and forth in the room, twisting her scarf between her hands. Her face showed a mixture of terror and determination. "We can't wait any longer," she said in a trembling but firm voice. "My son is out there alone, in the middle of a snowstorm, and with polar bears on the loose. I'm going to look for him." "You won't go alone," Sarah replied. "We'll organize search groups. Joe, I need you to coordinate with the fishermen. They know the terrain better than anyone." While the adults organized the search, Tom ventured deeper into the snowy forest. The darkness was almost total, but the reflection of the snow provided a faint illumination. He followed Snow's tracks, which were becoming increasingly erratic, and small drops of blood stained the snow at regular intervals. "Snow," he called softly, hoping not to scare the cub more. "I'm not going to hurt you, I just want to help you." A faint sound caught his attention, Behind a group of pine trees, he found the little bear huddled up, shaking. A wound on her hind leg was bleeding slowly, probably caused by sharp ice during her long sea journey. Tom approached slowly, remembering Mike's lessons on animal behavior. He kept his voice soft and his movements slow and predictable. "It's okay, little one," he whispered. "I know what it's like to be scared and alone, too." To his surprise, Snow showed no signs of aggression, her dark eyes fixed on him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Exhaustion and cold seemed to have diminished her natural defenses. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Jake and his men were preparing. They had silently unloaded boxes of equipment from their trucks, cages, nets, and rifles with tranquilizers. "The black market would pay a fortune for a polar bear and her cub," Jake muttered to his companions, "especially if they're in good condition. Work fast and quietly." What Jake didn't know was that he was being watched. Steve, the local forest ranger, had noticed the suspicious activity and was now stealthily heading towards the town to alert Sarah. On the beach, Aurora continued her desperate search. Her maternal instincts fought against her exhaustion as she sniffed the air for her cub's trail. The town's inhabitants maintained a prudent distance, but some couldn't help feeling compassion for the animal's evident distress. Mike, who had joined one of the search groups, noticed something worrying about Aurora's behavior. "She's disoriented," he explained to Sarah over the radio. "The change in ocean currents and the loss of ice in the Arctic have completely altered her navigation patterns. They shouldn't be here at this time of year." The storm increased in intensity, and the temperature dropped rapidly. The search groups were beginning to have difficulties maintaining their course in the middle of the blizzard. In the heart of the forest, Tom had managed to gain Snow's trust enough to examine her wound. Using his scarf, he improvised a bandage to stop the bleeding. "My father taught me that you should never give up," he told the bear as he worked. "He was a fisherman, you know. He always said that the sea teaches us to be strong." A nearby noise startled them both. Tom turned to see his mother, Anna, emerging from among the snowy trees. "Tom!" she exclaimed, but stopped short when she saw Snow. "Mum, she's hurt," Tom explained without moving from his position. "She can't walk well, and she's scared." Anna observed the scene with her heart in her throat. Her son, whom she had been about to scold for his recklessness, showed a compassion and maturity that left her speechless. "Sarah," she whispered into the radio, "I've found them, but we need medical help. And Mike, bring all the tranquilizers you can." The news that Tom had been found spread quickly through the search groups. However, the situation was far from resolved. Aurora, who had followed her cub's trail, was beginning to approach the area where they were. The sound of branches cracking alerted everyone. Anna instinctively embraced Tom, while Snow tried to stand up, responding to her mother's call. "Don't move," Tom whispered to Snow, keeping a hand gently on her back. "Your paw isn't well yet." At that moment, several events unfolded simultaneously. Mike and Sarah arrived with the medical equipment, followed by several villagers. Steve appeared from another side, panting. "Poachers! Jake and his men are in the forest!" And as if on cue, the sound of gunshots resonated in the night, followed by Aurora's furious roar. The confusion that followed was total. Jake's tranquilizers had missed their target, and now they had an adult polar bear enraged and disoriented, moving through the snowy forest. "Everyone stay still!" Mike shouted. "Sudden movements will only make the situation worse." Tom, who had never let go of Snow, began to softly hum a lullaby that his father used to sing to him. To everyone's surprise, the little bear calmed down, and her calm seemed to be transmitted to Aurora, who stopped a few meters away. "It's incredible," Mike murmured. "The boy has established a bond with her." Sarah took advantage of the moment of calm to organize the villagers. "Steve, take your men and stop Jake. The rest, we need to create a safe perimeter. Mike, do you think we can treat the cub here?" The veterinarian nodded while taking out his medical equipment. "If we keep calm and Tom keeps doing what he's doing, we might have a chance." The snow continued to fall, but the storm was beginning to subside. The town's lights filtered through the trees, creating an almost magical environment. Aurora, although maintaining her distance, seemed to have understood that they did not represent a threat to her cub. "Just like you took care of me when Dad left," Tom whispered to his mother while holding Snow during the treatment. "Now I can help take care of her." Anna couldn't hold back her tears, understanding that her son had found a unique way to process his own pain and turn it into something beautiful. The night progressed, and with it the story of North Star took an unexpected turn. What had begun as a crisis was transforming into something more, a lesson about compassion, courage, and the healing power of love, both among humans and animals. While Mike worked on Snow's wound, Sarah began to formulate a broader plan. This situation wasn't just about saving 2 polar bears, it was about facing the consequences of climate change and human responsibility towards nature. Christmas Eve in North Star had become more than a celebration. It was the beginning of a story that would forever change its inhabitants. The dawn of Christmas Day found North Star transformed. The storm had left behind a blanket of pristine snow that covered the town like a silent witness to the events of the previous night. In the community center, now converted into an improvised wildlife refuge, Mike worked tirelessly next to Snow while Tom dozed in a nearby chair. Sarah had convened an emergency meeting with the town council. The main hall of the town hall was crowded, voices mixed in a tense murmur as they discussed the fate of the polar bears. "We can't keep them here indefinitely," argued Bill, the head of the fishermen. "It's dangerous for the town and unnatural for them." "But we can't simply throw them out either," countered Mrs. Johnson, the teacher. "They've come all the way here for a reason. Climate change is destroying their habitat." Sarah listened attentively to each opinion, her mind working on possible solutions. The capture of Jake and his men the night before had added another layer of complexity to the situation. The poachers were in custody, but their contacts in the black market represented an ongoing threat. "Mike," Sarah called to the veterinarian, who had just entered the room. "What's the status of the bears?" The veterinarian took off his glasses and cleaned them with the edge of his coat before responding. "Snow is responding well to treatment. The wound wasn't as deep as we feared, but she's weak from the journey and exposure to the cold. Aurora, well, she's another matter. She's agitated, although she stays close to her cub. The problem is that both are malnourished." The news provoked a new wave of murmurs in the room. Feeding 2 polar bears was neither a simple nor economical task. At that moment, Tom entered the room, his eyes tired but bright with determination. "I have an idea," he said, his clear voice cutting through the adult conversations. "Why don't we use the fish that Jake had stored in his illegal warehouses?" A surprised silence followed his words. Sarah looked at the police chief, who nodded, confirming the existence of said warehouse. "We confiscated it last night along with his hunting equipment," the officer explained. "There's enough frozen fish to feed the bears for weeks." "That gives us time," said Sarah, "but we need a long-term plan." Anna, who had been quiet until then, stood up. "I've been in contact with some journalists. Tom's story with the bears is starting to circulate on social media. We could use this attention to get help." The discussion was interrupted by the urgent sound of the radio. It was Steve, the forest ranger, from his observation post. "Sarah, we have visitors. There are 3 vehicles approaching the town. They seem to be from a conservation organization, but there are also TV crews." The news fell like a bomb in the room. The story had spread faster than they expected. "This changes things," Sarah murmured. "We need to organize everything." "Mike, can we show Snow?" The veterinarian nodded cautiously. "As long as we keep the stress to a minimum. Tom has proven to be excellent at keeping her calm." The following hours were a whirlwind of activity. The town, which was already decorated for Christmas, became the stage for a story that captured global attention. Journalists and conservationists filled the snowy streets, while the inhabitants tried to maintain an appearance of normality. Tom became the involuntary center of attention. His connection with Snow fascinated everyone who witnessed it. The boy spent hours with the bear cub, reading her stories and speaking softly while Mike and his team worked. "It's as if they understand each other," commented a journalist while filming Tom drawing as Snow watched him curiously. But not everything was positive. The media presence also attracted unwanted attention. Sarah received reports of more poachers lurking around the town. The local police, already overwhelmed, had to establish additional patrols. By mid-afternoon, a team of marine biologists specialized in polar bears arrived. Their assessment of the situation was concerning. "Aurora and Snow's case is not unique," explained Dr. Emily Thompson, the team leader. "More and more polar bears are being forced away from their traditional territories due to Arctic ice melting. What you're seeing here is just the tip of the iceberg, if you'll pardon the pun." The scientists deployed several maps and charts on the meeting table. "Ocean currents are changing. The ice melts earlier and forms later each year. Polar bears are facing an existential crisis. While the adults discussed, Tom remained with Snow, oblivious to the chaos surrounding them. He had begun to notice patterns in the bear's behavior, how she tilted her head when she was curious, how her eyes followed certain movements, how she responded to different tones of voice. "They're scared," Tom said during a pause in the meeting. "Not just because they're here, they're scared because their home is disappearing." His words, simple but profound, silenced the room. Sarah looked out the window towards the sea, where Aurora patrolled the coast, never straying too far from her cub. "Then," she finally said, "it's not just about saving 2 polar bears, it's about saving their future." Dr. Thompson nodded. "Exactly. And perhaps this small coastal town can become the catalyst for greater change." As the day progressed, a new proposal began to take shape. The presence of the polar bears in North Star could serve as a powerful symbol for Arctic conservation. The town could become a center for research and education on climate change. But first, they had to ensure the immediate survival of Aurora and Snow. And with each passing hour, it became more evident that time was not on their side. Night fell over North Star, bringing with it new challenges. The Christmas lights continued to shine, but now they seemed to have a different meaning. They were a beacon of hope, not only for the town, but for 2 unexpected visitors who had forever changed their lives. In the community center, Tom had fallen asleep next to Snow, his sketchbook open showing sketches of polar bears swimming in an ocean of ice that no longer existed. The little bear, for the first time since her arrival, slept deeply, her breathing regular and calm. Sarah observed the scene from the door, aware that the decisions they would make in the next few hours would not only affect the fate of the bears, but could have repercussions far beyond the borders of their small coastal town. The morning of December 26th brought frenzied activity to North Star. The community center had been transformed into an improvised headquarters where scientists, conservationists, and town inhabitants worked together on what had been dubbed Operation Aurora. Dr. Thompson led a crucial meeting where options for relocating the bears were being discussed. Satellite maps covered the walls, showing traditional polar bear migration routes and areas where Arctic ice still persisted. "The problem isn't just taking them back," the scientist explained, pointing to areas marked in red. "It's finding a place where they can survive in the long term." The most recent data shows an alarming decrease in sea ice cover. Sarah, who had slept barely a few hours, studied the maps carefully. "How long do we have before it becomes too dangerous to keep them here?" Mike, who had just finished his morning checkup of Snow, intervened. "The cub is improving, but she needs a more suitable environment. And Aurora, she's showing increasing signs of stress." At that moment, Tom entered the room, carrying his sketchbook and several newspapers. The news about North Star's polar bears had spread throughout the world, and the town had become the center of media attention. "Look at this," the boy said, spreading the newspapers on the table. "There are people all over the world who want to help. There's even an internet campaign to raise funds." Anna, who had been coordinating communication with the media, confirmed her son's information. "Donations are coming in from everywhere. People have emotionally connected with Aurora and Snow's story." Dr. Thompson smiled for the first time in hours. "That gives us more options. We could organize a more ambitious relocation operation." A group of logistics experts then presented a detailed plan. They would need a specially equipped plane to transport the bears, an experienced medical team, and coordination with authorities from several countries. "The biggest challenge will be sedating Aurora," Mike explained. "It's extremely dangerous under the best circumstances, and she's particularly protective of Snow." Tom, who had been drawing while listening, looked up. "What if we didn't need to sedate her completely? I've been observing how she responds to different situations. She trusts me, and by extension, she seems calmer with people who are close to me." The boy's suggestion generated intense debate among the experts. It was unorthodox, but Tom had demonstrated a unique connection with the bears. While they discussed the details of the plan, the situation outside the community center was becoming complicated. The continuous presence of journalists and curious onlookers was beginning to affect Aurora's behavior, who was showing increasingly agitated. Sarah made an executive decision. "We need to clear the area immediately, only essential personnel near the bears, and we need to start preparations for the relocation as soon as possible." Dr. Thompson deployed a new map. We've identified an area in the high Arctic where a group of polar bears has established a new territory. There's enough sea ice and stable seal populations. It would be ideal for Aurora and Snow. The plan began to take shape. They would use an old military airfield on the outskirts of town as a starting point. The flight would follow a carefully planned route, with potential stops in case of emergency. But first, Mike added, we need to solve the most immediate problem: how to move the bears from here to the airfield. Tom, who had been unusually quiet, then shared a crucial observation. Snow follows the sound of my voice when I read to her, and Aurora follows Snow. We could use that. The idea was risky but promising. They would create a safe corridor using specially adapted vehicles and Tom's influence to guide the bears. As preparations accelerated, news of the imminent relocation generated mixed feelings in the town. In a short time, Aurora and Snow had become part of Northstar, symbols of something bigger than themselves. The afternoon brought new challenges. A team of marine biologists arrived with satellite tracking equipment that needed to be placed on Aurora before the relocation. The operation would require millimeter precision. If we can track her, Dr. Thompson explained, not only will we be able to monitor her safety, but also collect vital data on polar bear movement patterns in this new, changing climate. Tom spent the next few hours preparing Snow for the journey, reading her stories and drawing while the adults finalized the logistical details. The little bear seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. "Are you going to like the northern lights?" Tom whispered to her. "My father used to say they're like magic lights in the sky. Where you're going, you'll see them every night." Sarah observed the interaction between the boy and the bear with a mixture of pride and concern. The bond they had developed was extraordinary, but it also made the imminent separation more difficult. As night fell, the entire town mobilized for the final preparations. Trucks with specialized equipment arrived from the nearest airport. Veterinarians and animal handlers reviewed their protocols over and over again. "Tomorrow at dawn," Sarah announced to those gathered. "The weather forecast is favorable, and the sooner we act, the better for the bears." As the last rays of the sun tinged the sky orange, Tom sat next to Snow one last time before going to sleep. Aurora, who had come closer than usual, watched from a prudent distance. "It's not goodbye," the boy murmured, more to himself than to the bear. "It's the beginning of something new." On the horizon, the first stars began to appear, and with them the promise of a new day that would forever change the lives of everyone in Northstar. The day began before dawn in Northstar. An expectant silence enveloped the town as the sky gradually passed from black to deep blue. Preparations for relocating Aurora and Snow had continued throughout the night, and now everything was ready. Sarah made a final review of the planned route to the airfield. The streets had been cordoned off, creating a safe corridor of almost 2 kilometers. Specially equipped vehicles were strategically positioned along the way, ready to intervene if necessary. "Every detail counts," she murmured as she checked the positions on her tablet. "We can't afford any mistakes." In the community center, Tom prepared for his crucial role in the operation. He wore a special thermal suit designed to protect him from the cold while maintaining the necessary mobility. His mother, Anna, helped him adjust the communication equipment. "Are you sure about this, honey?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. Tom nodded as he put his inseparable sketchbook into a waterproof backpack. "Someone has to show them the way, Mum, and Snow trusts me." Dr. Thompson directed the last briefing with her team. The tranquilizers were prepared, but they hoped not to have to use them. The plan depended on the natural connection between Tom and the bears. "Remember," the scientist emphasized, "our goal is to keep stress to a minimum. If Aurora feels threatened at any time, the entire operation could fail." Mike, who had slept barely a few hours, performed a final checkup on Snow. The wound on her paw had healed remarkably well, and the little bear showed signs of having regained some of her strength. "It's incredible," he commented to Tom, who was observing the procedure. "She has a very strong spirit, just like you." Dawn arrived with an almost unreal softness. The sky was tinged pink and gold, and the freshly fallen snow sparkled like diamond dust. It was as if nature itself wanted to facilitate the operation. The moment of truth had arrived. Tom positioned himself next to Snow, while Dr. Thompson's team prepared to open the doors of the temporary enclosure. Aurora, who had been kept in an adjacent area, would be released simultaneously. "We start in 3, 2, 1, Sarah's voice resonated through the radios. The doors opened with a metallic creak. Tom began to walk slowly, his voice clear and calm as he read one of Snow's favorite stories. "Once upon a time, in the lands of the eternal north," he began, and as if by magic, the little bear followed him. Aurora emerged from her enclosure, her dark eyes assessing the situation. For a tense moment, everyone held their breath. Then, as they had hoped, she began to follow her cub. The procession advanced slowly through the snowy streets of Northstar. The town's inhabitants watched from their windows, many with tears in their eyes. What had begun as a crisis had become something beautiful and meaningful. Tom maintained a steady pace, alternating between reading and soft words of encouragement. Snow followed him faithfully, occasionally approaching to sniff his backpack, where he kept some fish as positive reinforcement. Halfway through, the first obstacle arose. A loud and unexpected noise from one of the houses scared Aurora, who stopped and began to show signs of agitation. "It's okay," Tom whispered without stopping walking. "Everything's fine. We're in this together." "Doctor." Thompson watched in amazement as the boy's voice seemed to have a calming effect, not only on Snow, but also on her mother. "It's extraordinary," she murmured into her recorder. "The level of trust they've developed defies everything we know about polar bear behavior." The sun was already high in the sky when they reached the airfield. The specially conditioned plane waited on the runway, its engines silent so as not to disturb the animals. The most delicate moment of the operation was about to begin. Tom guided Snow towards the loading ramp, which had been designed to resemble a natural cave. The interior of the plane was conditioned to maintain an optimal temperature and provide an environment as natural as possible during the flight. "It's your new path home," he told Snow as the little bear cautiously explored the ramp. Aurora watched from nearby, her maternal instinct on constant alert. The team of veterinarians prepared for the crucial moment. They needed both bears to enter the plane voluntarily, avoiding the use of tranquilizers if possible. Tom took out his sketchbook one last time and began to draw, sitting at the entrance of the plane. It was something he had done dozens of times over the last few days, and both Snow and Aurora associated this activity with moments of calm and safety. Little by little, as the boy drew and spoke softly, Snow ventured further into the plane. Aurora, after several minutes of hesitation, finally followed her. It was time to say goodbye. Tom stood up slowly, his eyes meeting Snow's one last time. "We'll see each other again," he promised, although he knew it was unlikely. "In my drawings, in my dreams, and in the stories I'll tell about you." Sarah gave the signal and the team began to close the ramp. Tom stepped back, feeling his mother's hand on his shoulder. As the sun reached its zenith, the plane began to move down the runway. The engines roared to life and slowly, the aircraft rose towards the northern sky. Tom remained on the runway until the plane was out of sight, his sketchbook pressed against his chest. It wasn't just two bears departing for the Arctic, it was a part of his heart, a story that had changed his life and that of all of Northstar. The weeks following Aurora and Snow's departure brought significant changes to Northstar. The small coastal town, which was previously known mainly for its fishing, had become an international symbol of conservation and hope. Sarah now found herself in her office, reviewing the avalanche of emails and proposals that arrived daily. Environmental organizations, scientific institutions, and even foreign governments showed interest in turning Northstar into a research center on climate change and Arctic wildlife. "I never imagined we'd get to this," she commented to Mike, who had entered with the latest bear tracking reports. "How are they?" The veterinarian deployed a digital map showing Aurora and Snow's movements, tracked by satellite devices. "They've successfully reached the designated area," he explained, pointing to a spot in the high Arctic. "Dr. Thompson reports that they're adapting well. They've found a group of polar bears and, most importantly, there's enough sea ice in that region to sustain seal hunting." Tom, who spent every free moment helping in the new veterinary clinic that was being established in town, listened attentively while drawing in his sketchbook. His illustrations of Aurora and Snow had gone viral on the internet, inspiring people around the world. "Do you think they're happy?" he asked, without looking up from his drawing. Mike approached the boy and observed his work, a detailed representation of Aurora and Snow hunting on the ice under the northern lights. "Animals don't think about happiness like we do," he responded softly. "But they're where they should be, doing what their nature dictates. And that, in a way, is the greatest happiness for them." Northstar's transformation continued at an accelerated pace. Jake's old warehouse had been converted into a rehabilitation center for marine animals, and the local school had incorporated a special environmental education program. Anna, who now coordinated the town's volunteer program, organized beach cleanup groups and conservation workshops. The experience with the polar bears had awakened a collective awareness about the fragility of the Arctic ecosystem. "It's as if Aurora and Snow left us a gift," she reflected as she watched a group of children learning about marine life. "They showed us that we can make a difference." One afternoon, while Tom was helping Mike with some rescued seal pups, exciting news arrived. Dr. Thompson had sent the first images captured by automatic cameras in Aurora and Snow's new area. "Look at this!" Sarah exclaimed, gathering everyone in the community center. The photographs showed Aurora and Snow perfectly integrated into their new environment. The little bear had grown noticeably, and her mother looked strong and healthy. Most surprisingly was seeing how they interacted with other polar bears, especially Snow, who seemed to have found playmates her age. "It's exactly as you drew it," Anna whispered to Tom, pointing to one of his sketches hanging on the center's wall. The impact of Aurora and Snow's story extended far beyond Northstar. Researchers from around the world studied the case as a unique example of interaction between humans and wildlife. The connection that Tom had established with the bears challenged traditional theories about animal behavior. What happened here, Dr. Thompson explained in a video conference, wasn't just a successful rescue. It was a demonstration that empathy and understanding can transcend the barriers between species. The town was also experiencing positive economic changes. Responsible tourism began to flourish, with visitors interested in learning about marine conservation and Arctic life. Sarah worked tirelessly to ensure that this development benefited the community without compromising their environmental values. One night, as the northern lights danced in the sky above Northstar, Tom sat on the beach where it had all begun. The sea was calm, and the town's lights reflected in the dark waters. "Thinking about them?" asked Mike, who had approached silently. Tom nodded, showing him his latest drawing, an imaginary view of Aurora and Snow under the same northern lights. "You know," Mike continued, "some scientists believe that polar bears can recognize patterns in the night sky. Perhaps at this moment, they're looking at the same lights we are." The idea made Tom smile. He took out his sketchbook and began a new drawing, this time including the town of Northstar under the Aurora Borealis, symbolically connecting the two worlds that Aurora and Snow had united. Sarah, who was observing from a distance, understood that the true legacy of the polar bears was not just the physical transformation of the town, but the change in the hearts of its inhabitants. Northstar had become a beacon of hope, demonstrating that even the smallest communities could have a global impact. Sometimes, she reflected aloud, it takes a storm to change the course of things. Aurora and Snow were our perfect storm. Spring arrived in Northstar, bringing changes as profound as the thaw that transformed the landscape. The town, which had once been primarily a fishing community, had become an international center for marine research and conservation. The old fishing cooperative building, renovated thanks to international funds, now housed the Aurora Arctic Research Center, named in honor of the polar bear that had changed the town's destiny. Scientists from all over the world arrived to study the effects of climate change in the region and develop conservation strategies. Tom, who had just turned 13, spent every free moment at the center. His room had become an improvised art studio, with walls covered in drawings documenting Northstar's transformation. His illustrations of Aurora and Snow had become the official symbol of the research center. "Your art tells a story that words can't express," Dr. Thompson told him one day, who had returned to Northstar to oversee the installation of new monitoring equipment. "It captures the emotional connection we need for people to understand why it's important to protect the Arctic." One particularly significant morning, Sarah gathered the entire town in the community center for an important announcement. The large screens showed real-time satellite images of the Arctic. "We have extraordinary news," she began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "The latest tracking data shows that Aurora has had new cubs." The room erupted in exclamations of joy. The images showed Aurora emerging from her winter den with two small cubs, while Snow, now almost an adult, stayed close by. "It's as if they're sending us a message," Anna whispered to Tom, who was frantically drawing, trying to capture the moment. "Life goes on, it renews itself." Mike, who now directed a marine wildlife rehabilitation program, added his professional perspective. "This is the best possible indicator that the relocation was a success. Aurora is healthy and secure enough to raise a new generation." The impact of Aurora and Snow's story continued to expand. An international documentary about their rescue was in production, and Tom had been invited to participate as an artistic consultant. His drawings would serve as storyboards for the film's animated sequences. "I never thought my drawings would go so far," he commented to his mother, as he worked on a new series of illustrations. It's as if each stroke was a way of keeping them close. The town was also experiencing other positive changes. The new economy, based on research and ecotourism, had created opportunities for everyone. The former fishermen had become expert guides, sharing their knowledge of the sea with researchers and visitors. Sarah worked tirelessly to maintain a balance between development and preservation. Each new project had to pass rigorous environmental impact studies. "We are guardians now," she explained in council meetings, "not just of our town, but of a story that belongs to the world." One afternoon, while Tom was helping Mike with the rehabilitation of an injured seal, they received a live transmission from the automatic cameras in the Arctic. Snow had been captured, teaching her new younger siblings how to hunt on the ice. "Do you see that?" Mike pointed out. "She's using the same techniques that Aurora taught her. Knowledge is passed from generation to generation." The observation sparked an idea in Tom. He began working on a new project, an illustrated children's book that would tell the story of Aurora and Snow, but also explain the importance of the Arctic and the effects of climate change in a way that younger children could understand. "I want other kids to feel what I felt," he explained to Sarah when he presented the project, "to understand that we can make a difference no matter how young we are." The proposal was received with enthusiasm, and soon the project expanded to include a complete educational program. Schools from all over the world began requesting copies of Tom's Notebook, as the material was informally known. One day, while working on the final illustrations for the book, Tom received an unexpected surprise. Dr. Thompson had organized an expedition to the Arctic to document the behavior of Aurora and her family, and wanted him to participate. "Your connection with them is unique," she explained, "and your ability to document what you see through art would be invaluable to our work." The news shook the town. The idea that Tom could see Aurora and Snow again, even if from the safe distance of an observation post, seemed to close a perfect circle. "It's as if fate had traced this path," Anna reflected as she helped her son prepare for the trip. "From that scared boy who chased a polar bear in the middle of a storm, to a young artist who helps protect the Arctic." North Star's transformation continued, like the waves that incessantly shaped its coast. The story of Aurora and Snow had planted a seed that was now blooming in unexpected and beautiful ways. The buzz of the helicopter broke the silence of the Arctic as it flew over the vast expanse of ice and water. Tom, with his sketchbook firmly grasped, looked out the window with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Beside him, Dr. Thompson reviewed the data on her tablet, preparing for the landing at the temporary research station. "Nervous?" asked the scientist, noticing the tension on the young man's face. Tom nodded, unable to find the right words to describe the storm of emotions he was feeling. It had been almost 2 years since he had last seen Aurora and Snow, and now he was about to reunite with them, even if from a distance. The base camp was situated on the edge of a vast ice field. High-tech tents designed to withstand the harsh Arctic conditions formed a small circle around a central structure that served as a laboratory and communications center. They had barely landed when the research team greeted them with exciting news. "We've located them," exclaimed Dr. Eriksson, a Norwegian biologist specializing in polar bears. "Aurora and her family are about 10 kilometers to the north. If we hurry, we can reach the observation post before nightfall." The snowmobile journey through the icy landscape was a surreal experience for Tom. The midnight sun bathed the ice in golden and pink hues, creating a spectacle that the young artist frantically tried to capture in his sketchbook. Finally, they reached the observation post, a camouflage structure designed to blend in with the environment and allow observation of the bears without disturbing them. Tom held his breath as Dr. Thompson adjusted the powerful telescope. "There they are," she whispered, gesturing for him to look. Tom's heart skipped a beat when he finally saw them. Aurora, as majestic as ever, was guiding her two cubs along the edge of an ice floe, and there, a short distance away, was Snow, now a young and strong bear. "It's incredible," Tom murmured, his eyes filling with tears. "They've grown so much." Over the next few days, Tom alternated between observing the bears and creating detailed illustrations of their behavior. His drawings captured not only the physical appearance of the animals, but also their personalities and family dynamics. "Your work is extraordinary," commented Dr. Erickson as he reviewed Tom's sketches. "You capture details that even our high-resolution cameras miss." One morning, as they watched the bear family hunting seals, something unexpected happened. Snow, who had been exploring the edge of the ice, separated from the group and began swimming towards an ice mass near the observation post. "This is unusual," Dr. Thompson murmured, adjusting the camera controls to follow her movements. Tom watched, holding his breath. As Snow approached, he could see every detail of her face, every scar on her fur. For a moment, her eyes seemed to meet those of the young artist. "It's as if she recognizes me," Tom whispered, although he knew it was impossible. Dr. Thompson was about to respond when they noticed a change in Snow's behavior. The young bear had stopped and was sniffing the air with interest. "Incredible," exclaimed Dr. Erickson. "She seems to be performing a recognition behavior." "It's possible she's caught a familiar scent." Tom felt his heart racing. Was it possible that Snow remembered something from her time in North Star? Could she recognize the scent of the humans who had cared for her? For several tense minutes, Snow remained near the observation post, her curiosity apparently in conflict with her natural caution. Finally, responding to Aurora's distant call, the young bear turned around and swam back to her family. "What we've just witnessed is extraordinary," commented Dr. Thompson, her voice full of emotion. "It could provide new insights into long-term memory in polar bears." For Tom, however, the moment went beyond science. It was a connection, a bridge between two worlds that seemed irreconcilable. With trembling hands, he began to draw, trying to capture not only what he had seen but what he had felt. The days in the Arctic passed quickly, filled with observations, discoveries, and moments of indescribable beauty. Tom filled notebook after notebook with drawings and notes, documenting not only Aurora and her family, but also the fragile beauty of the Arctic ecosystem. The night before returning to North Star, as the northern lights danced in the sky, Tom sat outside the camp, contemplating the vast, icy landscape. "You know," said Dr. Thompson, joining him, "when we started this project, I thought we were here to study the bears. But now I realize we're learning as much about ourselves as we are about them." Tom nodded, understanding perfectly what the scientist meant. His journey, which had begun with the unexpected rescue of two polar bears, had become something much bigger, a lesson about the interconnectedness of all things, about the responsibility we have towards our planet and towards all the creatures that inhabit it. As the midnight sun shone over the icy horizon, Tom made one last drawing: Aurora, Snow, and the cubs under the northern lights, with the small town of North Star visible in the distance. It was an impossible image in reality, but one that perfectly captured the essence of their incredible journey. Tom's return to North Star was received with great anticipation. The community center was packed to the rafters when he presented his findings and shared his experiences in the Arctic. His drawings, projected on a large screen, transported the town's inhabitants to the icy world of Aurora and Snow. "What we've learned," Tom explained, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "is that the connection between us and nature is much deeper than we thought. Every action we take here has an impact there." Sarah, observing from the back of the room, realized that the boy who had once recklessly run after a polar bear had become an eloquent and passionate young man. Tom's journey to the Arctic had solidified North Star's position as a world-important research and conservation center. In the months that followed, the town underwent an even deeper transformation. Tom's illustrated book, Aurora's Journey, became an international success, translated into dozens of languages. Schools around the world began using the story of Aurora and Snow as a starting point to teach about climate change and conservation. One day, As Tom was working on a new series of illustrations at the research center, he received an unexpected visit. A United Nations delegation had arrived in North Star to study the sustainable development model that the town had adopted. "Your story, the story of Aurora and Snow, has inspired a global movement," the UN representative told him. "We're here to see how we can replicate this model in other coastal communities affected by climate change." The news filled Tom with a mixture of pride and responsibility. He understood that the legacy of Aurora and Snow went far beyond his own personal experiences. Meanwhile, in the Arctic, Dr. Thompson and her team continued to monitor Aurora and her family. The data collected was providing invaluable information on how polar bears were adapting to changes in their habitat. One afternoon, as they reviewed the latest satellite images, they noticed something surprising. Snow, now fully adult, had separated from the family group and seemed to be establishing her own territory. "It's the natural cycle of life, Doctor," Thompson explained to Tom via video conference. "But the fascinating thing is the location she's chosen. It's very close to the area where we released her years ago." The news sparked a wave of emotions in Tom. It was as if Snow somehow remembered her journey and had found a balance between her wildlife and her connection to the humans who had saved her. Inspired by this new information, Tom began working on a new project, a series of murals that would tell the complete story of Aurora and Snow, from their unexpected arrival in North Star to their current life in the Arctic. The murals would cover the walls of the research center, serving as a constant reminder of the town's mission. As he worked on the murals, Tom reflected on how a series of seemingly random events had changed the course of so many lives. The rescue of 2 polar bears had triggered a transformation that went far beyond the borders of North Star. Sarah, observing the progress of the murals, commented, "You know, when all this began, I thought we were saving 2 bears. Now I realize they saved us. They gave us a purpose, a connection to something bigger than ourselves." The impact of Aurora and Snow's story continued to grow. Scientists, conservationists, and world leaders regularly visited North Star, seeking inspiration and knowledge. The small coastal town had become a model of how local communities could play a crucial role in the fight against climate change. One night, as Tom was putting the finishing touches on one of the murals, he received exciting news. The United Nations General Assembly had approved a resolution to establish a new protected area in the Arctic, directly inspired by the story of Aurora and Snow. The area included the territory where the bears now lived and extended to protect a vast region of vital ecological importance. "It's more than we ever dreamed of," Mike said, reading the news with tears in his eyes. "A small act of compassion has led to the protection of an entire ecosystem." As the midnight sun shone over North Star, Tom stood in front of the finished mural. The image showed Aurora and Snow in their Arctic habitat, but also included elements of North Star and faces of people from around the world who had been touched by their story. "It's a bridge," Tom murmured, running his hand over the still fresh paint. "A bridge between 2 worlds that we thought were separate, but are actually deeply connected." The legacy of Aurora and Snow had transcended the boundaries of species, geography, and time. Their story had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the most unexpected and challenging moments, there exists the possibility of creating positive and lasting change. 10 years had passed since that Christmas Eve that forever changed the destiny of North Star. The town, once a small fishing settlement, had become a beacon of hope and a model of sustainable development, recognized internationally. Tom, now a young man of 23, stood on the beach where it all began. His hair, longer and more unruly, swayed in the sea breeze while his eyes, which still retained that spark of childlike curiosity, scanned the horizon. "It's hard to believe so much time has passed," Sarah murmured, joining him on the beach. The mayor, now with some silver strands in her hair, had recently been appointed as a special advisor to the United Nations on conservation and community development issues. Tom nodded, his mind full of memories. "Sometimes I wonder if it was all a dream," he confessed. "But then I see how everything has changed and I know it was real." The Aurora Arctic Research Center had expanded considerably. Scientists from all over the world worked there, studying not only polar bears, but also the effects of climate change on the entire Arctic ecosystem. Tom's murals, which told the story of Aurora and Snow, had become an attraction in their own right, inspiring visitors of all ages. But the most significant change was in people's mindsets. North Star had become a living example of how a small community could have a global impact. Local fishermen now worked closely with scientists, sharing their traditional knowledge of the sea and learning new sustainable fishing techniques. "We have news," Mike announced, approaching with his tablet. The veterinarian, now in his 70s, was still as active as ever, directing the Marine Wildlife Rehabilitation Program. "It's about Snow." Tom and Sarah eagerly approached as Mike showed the latest satellite images. Snow, now a fully grown polar bear, had been seen with 2 cubs of her own. "The circle is complete," Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. For Tom, the news awakened a mix of emotions. Seeing Snow become a mother reminded him of how much time had passed and how much things had changed. But he also felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the bear he had once saved was now contributing to the survival of her species. "There's more," Mike continued, sliding his finger across the screen. "The automatic cameras captured this last night. The image showed Snow and her cubs near one of the remote research stations. The bear seemed to be sniffing the air with interest, in a way that recalled that moment years ago when she had approached the observation post where Tom was. It's as if she remembers," Tom murmured, his voice laden with emotion. "As if she somehow knows we're connected." Dr. Thompson, who had arrived in North Star for an international conference on Arctic conservation, joined the group on the beach. "What we're seeing," she explained, "challenges many of our assumptions about polar bear memory and behavior. Snow's story could open new paths in our understanding of these magnificent creatures." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Tom took out his sketchbook. With quick, confident strokes, he began to sketch a new image. Snow with her cubs, with the town of North Star and the research center visible in the background. "You know," he said without looking up from his drawing, "when I was a kid, I dreamed of adventures in far-off lands. I never imagined that the greatest adventure of my life would begin right here, on our little beach." Sarah smiled, remembering the impulsive boy who had run after a polar bear in the middle of a snowstorm. "Sometimes," she reflected, "the greatest adventures are the ones that find us, not the ones we seek." As night fell over North Star, the lights of the research center came on, shining like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Somewhere in the vast Arctic, Aurora, Snow, and their families continued their lives, unaware of the impact they had had on the human world. Tom finished his drawing and held it up in front of him, allowing the last light of day to illuminate the image. In it, past and present merged into a vision of a future where humans and nature coexisted in harmony. "This," he said, showing the drawing to the others, "is our true legacy. Not just the story of 2 polar bears, but the story of how we learn to see the world differently." Sarah nodded, understanding the depth of Tom's words. "And it's a story that will continue," she added. "With every child who learns about Aurora and Snow, with every scientist who studies the Arctic, with every decision we make to protect our planet." As the group walked back to town, Tom took one last look at the sea. For a moment, he could almost see Aurora and Snow swimming in the distant waters, their white figures shining under the starlight. The story of Aurora and Snow had begun as a chance encounter between 2 species, but it had become something much bigger, a symbol of hope, a catalyst for change, and a reminder of the interconnectedness of all life on Earth. And so, as North Star prepared for another night, the legacy of 2 lost polar bears continued to inspire generations, transcending borders and species, and demonstrating that even the smallest acts of compassion can have an impact that endures through time.